Hello everyone, my name is Andrei Nozhenko and today we will talk about anyLogistix API. I am the product owner of the anyLogistix software and I'll show you the capabilities for the process automation and digital twin creation using anyLogistix Open API functionality. First of all, let me share my screen. And here we will start. And today's webinar will cover the following topics. We will talk about the supply chain models and problems which can require automation. After that, I'll show you an overview of anyLogistix professional server version architecture to understand how API works and why it can help you in solving your problems. Then we will look through API capabilities. And after that, we will move to a part where we'll have some practice, write some code, see some functions, and so on. Let's continue. And first of all, let's talk about what is a supply chain model itself. So imagine we have a working supply chain which has its structure, connections between objects, sourcing, inventory policies, and so on. And we have lots of ideas how to improve it, how to make things better, and so on, but we are not allowed to test them in the real life. So we create a computerized supply chain model, a digital twin of your supply chain. And in general, this digital twin model can represent even the supply chain which is not existing yet, but let's consider our case where it's already existing. So here we get to a virtual world where we can test our hypothesis, check some ideas, tune our policies, and so on. But even after we do all of these things, we can connect our virtual model to our ERP systems or another supply chain tools, such as Oracle or SAP and so on, and update the current state of this virtual model, run it again, check some new decisions, forecast some behavior, and so on. But even after this, we can connect our model to some analytical tools or make some automation in notifications. For example, we can export our data to analytic tools such as Power BI or Tableau. We can create some reports and send them by email or somewhere else. We can notify analytics about the actions that should be done, and so on and so on. So after we created a model once, we can reuse it and update with the actual data and make some processes that can help us in the future. And here are some examples of what problems can be solved continuously on a different levels: strategic level, tactical level, or operational level. So we can experiment and optimize not only when we have to build the whole structure of the supply chain or some general changes, but also we can run model oftenly, period by period, to analyze, experiment, and forecast behavior and KPIs that are important for us. And how anyLogistix can help you with this? First of all, let's take a look on the architecture of the anyLogistix professional server. First of all, when anyLogistix installed on a server, it represents logic, engines, and solvers which can be run and executed over some data. This data contains in the database. Database can be internal or external. Internal means that this database located on the same server where anyLogistix is installed, and it's automatically installed with the anyLogistix itself. But also you can connect during the installation anyLogistix to some external PostgreSQL database, and which, for example, can be located on another server where you have the specific rules for backup and so on. And after that, having some inputs, they go to engines and solvers, optimize, calculate something. Then we get some outputs, which also are put into the same database. So in general, anyLogistix contains from engines and solvers from one side and the database from other side. This database contains all the required data for anyLogistix work. All the inputs, all the outputs, information about registered users, all projects, and so on and so on. And to communicate with this server, we use a web interface. We just open the web browser, enter the server address, and then using REST API, web interface communicates with server data. It shows your interface, you select what scenario you want to work with, maybe import something, execute experiments, and so on and so on. The other way to communicate with the server is to have a BI tools which have access to the database directly and take inputs and outputs directly to the BI tools. But here we need to understand that all this data stored somehow inside the database in the views that are used by anyLogistix itself and not additionally prepared somehow for being processing with these BI tools. And if we return back to the web interface and REST API, the API itself can be split into several parts. The first two parts are private part of the API and public part of the API. And web interface work with both of them. So it uses functions that are developed for communication with the server, and some of these functions are not allowed for using outside from anywhere except web interface, and another part is allowed for such using. So private is the first one, public is the second one. And in addition to these public and private parts, we have let's name it additional API part, and together with public API, it's the open functions which can be accessed from Java or Python clients to communicate with anyLogistix server. Additional part of API is in general some optional functions which internally use public and private parts and created to make the developing of any process and coding easier for the user, and to make some actions happen using only one row of code. Also, we can use API clients to communicate with the BI tools. We can get some data from anyLogistix, we can get some results, we can process them somehow and prepare them in the view which is already look like something very useful for BI tool or in the format of BI tool, and can be probably directly send it using the API of this BI tool. Or maybe you can use some temporary files or database and your BI tool will read these tables or files to update the information. And what functions and what functionality is open for the access for these API clients? It's connecting to an existing project. So if you have any project in anyLogistix, you can and should first of all connect to it, and then every actions you do will be done inside this project. If you need to do something in another project, you should close connection to this project and establish connection to another one. Also, you can import scenarios from Excel or a database, update the data of some scenarios that are already existing in the project, run experiments, and before this run, you can define experiment settings. Of course, you can get results which were created by experiments. You can get dashboards and chart data, so you can get all the pages on the dashboard, all the charts that are located on these pages, and also get the data which is shown by these charts. You can export dashboard pages to Excel, like we do it in the interface by right-clicking on the tab and export them to Excel. And if you do not need to keep the scenario which you worked with, you can remove the scenario if you want to keep your project clean and not to store so much data. And now let's move to a practice part, and we will start from the first case. Imagine that you have some regular workflow of current state analysis of the supply chain, and one of its parts is running a simulation experiment every period of time and exporting the results of this simulation somewhere for the next stage of this workflow. So as the data source, you have a scenario with updated data. It can be inventory levels, updated demand, or updated demand forecast, or maybe updated structure, the state of distribution center, factory, whatever it is. And this is the prepared state for the next observable period. You should import this prepared scenario. You need to run simulation, export results for the further analysis, and also it can require some changes in the experiment settings. For example, the settings are the same in this scenario and only actual state is updating, so you need to move the simulating period forward in dependence of what period is simulating. And before we start this practice part, let me show you what steps are required for any process when you use API. So we can split them into two parts, preparation and coding part. In the preparation part, first of all, you need to download API library for the required language, Java or Python. How to do all these steps, I will show you in the interface a bit later. And after you downloaded this library, you also should know the address of your server where anyLogistix is installed. You need to create a project in anyLogistix and get user API key. So we do not use any login and password for API, for working with anyLogistix server using API. But you can generate your personal API key in the interface, and by this key, anyLogistix will understand which user is connecting to it, what access rules does it have has an access to given project, or can this user do some or another actions, and so on and so on. In the coding part, you need to create a project on a selected programming language, connect API library to this project to make this project use this library. Then using information that you have, server address and API key, you need to create API client as an object, and this object you will use through all the logic executing some functions from the server. First thing that you need to do is connect to the required project. You can find it by name or by its ID, do some action, then close project. That's it. If you need another connect to another project, you just repeat from the beginning and so on. And now let me show you how to do it in the user interface. First of all, we need to have a project. So project can be created by the initial screen. For example, like here, let me remove this project and create new one. Let's name it ALX API webinar. And if we remember, the first thing that we need to do is download an API library, even before we create any project and enter it. So here in help menu, we have a button Get API libraries. So here we select Java or Python library, download it, then connect it to our project, which will be later. And also what we need to have is to get an API key. So let me open this project and enter the control panel here and go to the personal data tab. And here are my personal information and also API key to work with server. Anytime I can generate a new key, and after I generate a new one, the previous one stopped working. So if you need for some reason regenerate your keys, so it can be done here. But now let me just copy this key to a clipboard preparation is over now. I can close control panel. And after that, let's move to coding part. And I have here my project. Here is the draft project for starting, which has some constants for the exercise. But first of all, I'll show you that here I have an downloaded Java client as a connected library, and I will use it in my code. And if we return back to our problem definition, we need to import some prepared scenario and run simulation and export results for analysis, the main part of what we should do. And here in this first project, I have the server address here. I have a constant for the API key. Let me insert it here. Also, I have here a project name, which I will work with, and the importing file name on my local hard drive, which I want to import. And what I described in the coding part, which is required for any logic that will be implemented using API. First of all, we need to create an object API client, which should know the server address and API key. And after that, we create an API object, which we will use to do all the things with anyLogistix server. For example, here, after I finish work with the project, I just use API, close project function, and that's it. But now, let's start from the beginning, and let me write some code here. So first of all, we need to connect to existing project. So for this, I use API and use function find and open project by name. Also, we have lots of another function for working with projects. If you know the project ID, you can open project by its ID. But if you know only the name and don't want to work with any IDs, you can use this function. And we should give here two arguments. The first one will tell, should we search using the full match of the name, or just the string that I enter will should only contain inside the name. We want to define the full name, and here I insert the project name constant here. And this will give me a project data, which I will use later and for the further actions, and store here some information. Let's trace that we have opened the project. After that, we need to import a scenario. Again, I'll go to API object and use import scenario function. And I should give this function a project ID. For this, I use my project data object and ID of it, and a file based on the location on my local hard drive. Let's log here that scenario imported here. I will create an object scenario data. Here it is. The next step, we should find the proper experiment to run. And for this, I will use the function getExperiment. And here I should give as an argument a constant which represents the experiment type. In my case, it will be simulation. For this, I use the special object where all these constants are located. So here are all the experiment types that we have. And after that, I need to say for what scenario this experiment should be found. Let's create a variable here. Name it simulation experiment. And for working with different experiments, we have different configurations and configuration classes here. Here we have API abstract run configuration, but if I switch it to a simulation run configuration, I will be able to work with this variable as a simulation experiment. After that, I need to run this experiment, and for this, I need to get a configuration of it to have an ID configuration in the next step. And to run experiment, I'll just use the function run experiment synchronously, and after that I will give here simulation run configuration ID, and let's log here that here we start experiment running, and here we finished experiment running. And let's log some information to know that we did everything successfully. For example, let's trace to the log the information about the dashboards and dashboard tabs and charts which are located on these tabs. And for this, I just need to use function getExperiment dashboard pages, where I should give API experiment result ID, and now I can create a variable experiment dashboard pages. Then I can iterate over this list of dashboard pages and trace, for example, dashboard experiment dashboard page name, and I can even iterate over experiment dashboard page charts. And let's trace the names of these charts. That's it. Here I have the code which finds and opens the project, imports scenario, finds and runs simulation experiment, and trace the information about dashboard pages here. And now let's run this experiment and check it in the interface that everything goes okay. After everything compiles, we see that project was opened, and now scenario has been imported. If we open this scenario, we will see the icon that shows us that simulation experiment is running now. Then we will wait a bit, and after that, the result will appear here. And we even can see the data in the tables, lines, and so on. And also all the information we have logged as we did it in the code. The scenario imported, experiment start of experiment running, finish, and so on. But let's move to a next step where we will change some experiments configuration and export data of the result to an Excel file. For example, we are needed to export this first step, profit and loss statement, and we need to find it in the dashboard and then export it to Excel file. And for this, I have already prepared scenario here. And what I need to do is to put here my API key. I already put it here and just duplicate it here for ILX to understand that that's me with the proper rights. And also I've added here a constant which represents the path to the file where I want to export dashboard information. And what we get in the code here. As before, we create an API object, we connect to an existing project, we import scenario, get simulation experiment, and after that, for example, I need to change the stop date of the simulation. By default, it was the end of the year, but I need to move it to the 1st of June of 2023. I create this new object representing this new stop date. After that, I need to get the property which represents the stopping date. In the interface, I can see it here in the settings, or here, experiment end, which I need to be a custom period. So I need to define this field to be custom period. For this, I get this field. I define the type that should be there. And after that, I define stop date for the run configuration. After I finish defining all the fields, all the properties of the running configuration, I need to notify anyLogistix that we have updated something because we work locally and anyLogistix server knows nothing about our changes. We use update experiment run configuration function and send there our updated simulation experiment. After that, let's check that all settings were applied. Here we update the variable with configuration and trace the new stop date of the experiment. Then we run experiment as before. After that, another option that we have here, we can get a validation status of experiment running. For example, if we imported scenario with some errors which anyLogistix can handle and return you that there are some mistakes or errors or some empty data that's required for experiment run, like you can see it in the interface. So here we have no interface and should check it manually. For example, if our results validation status has errors, we can trace these errors and then stop executing of our logic. Otherwise, if everything okay, we can go further. Here we again trace information about the dashboard, and the next step that is new is that we need to find the certain dashboard page. For this, we need to use getExperimentDashboard page method and give him the ID of the experiment result, the name of this dashboard page, and the flag if we should we should search for a full match or just a part of the name. For example, if I remove here the word statement, nothing will be found. If I write here false, and even if I have the several dashboard pages which start or contain profit and loss phrase, I will be given the first of them. But I know the full name, so here I can leave true and the full name. And after that, I just need to execute export dashboard page function, where I give the experiment result ID and dashboard page ID as inputs. And after that, as result, I will get an array of bytes which are already prepared to being saved locally on my hard drive. And for this, I just use the Java function write to a file. And to check that everything is okay, I can open this output file. Then I again close the project and log this that I finished. Also, if I need to remove scenario after everything happened and Excel file was already exported, I can use api.removeScenarioById function, give it the ID of the scenario, and after everything will finish, scenario will also be removed. And let's run this example and check in the interface what will happen. We connected to a project, we imported scenario, we running simulation experiment is complete, and now Excel file is opening. And let me move it here. And here we see that new scenario appeared. It also has one simulation experiment result. And if we look here at the settings, we have the 1st of June defined as an end date, and the same we see in the result here. And what we see in the Excel file, here we have 3 pages. The first one for the line chart, which is named revenue and total cost, this one. The second one is for the table. Here it is. And the third one is for the bar chart. And even in Excel, I can insert here a bar chart just to check that everything okay. I have profit bar, revenue, total cost. So this you can need when you developing your logic for validation that everything works right. And here we finished with this practice. And let's move to the next one. In the next practice exercise, we'll consider a network optimization experiment, and we'll do the following. Imagine that we have prepared supply chain structure with the potential distribution center locations, and we want to find the optimal locations for different regions. But we also want to check if our solution, which will be found, is resilient enough to satisfy all the demand in different forecasts that we have. So that's some kind of stress testing of our solution. And I want to find the optimal combination of distribution centers for each of the demands that I have. So I'll have 5 of them, the baseline, and 2 negative and 2 positives. And after I have my result, I'll need to upload all my results to a Power BI. And first of all, let me show you the data that we have as the preparation for this exercise. I have a baseline scenario here, which contains all the scenario data that we need, except demand. So this is our baseline scenario. Also, I have a folder where I have all the demand forecasts, and these Excel files contain only, let me show, demand page and 2 technical pages which are needed for anyLogistix for any scenario exported in Excel file to be imported back again. And also, I have a prepared Power BI file which connected to CSV files and will update me some information. Sure. So what I need to be done? Let's switch to another example here. let me input here my API key. So as an input, I have a baseline scenario location. I have a folder where all my demand is stored. I know that I will save all my results to a CSV file, to two CSV files. And after that, I want to combine all the information from these 5 results together. And now, first of all, let me run this scenario, this logic, because it will take some time to execute all of this while I'll describe in you what's happening. So first, again, we import the network optimization scenario, baseline scenario. And after that, so here we connect to existing projects. I prepared some collections to store the data. I import baseline scenario. And after that, iterating over the files located in my importing folder, I do the importing to an existing scenario of this scenario from the file, and also I give the list of table IDs which should be updated. So for this, I can get from the API the information about all the tables and get from these tables the table with the name demand for the network optimization experiment. And giving it to this function, I say that I am doing a partial import, like it can be shown in the interface, import to existing scenario. I select some scenario here, and then I select demand table. That's it. But all this happens automatically. So we see in a log that we imported baseline scenario and first baseline demand was imported, experiment finished, and result processed. Now we are importing another demand. So after we imported demand, we then run network optimization experiment, get result options. So they are here. And then we process information from this result option. And also we process information from the overall statistics that we have in the results. So it contains all the financial statistics. And I want to combine all the data from all these overall stats tables into one, and then export it to CSV file for my Power BI dashboard. After that, when I finish iterating over all these files, I process all the data. So I get so after all the 5 iterations finish, I get all the data about the distribution center names. I process and export experiment results and then write them to CSV file. And let's have a look into the result processing here. So I have a separate function for this. And what we have here, so from the result option that I have as an output, I can get the description. I can process data in this description and get all the distribution center names from it. After that, I want to get a dashboard page. In here, I get it in another way. I just get all the pages and filter them manually by the name that I need. I know that it contains only one chart as a table. That's why I get the first one. And after that, I want to get the experiment result chart table data here from the dashboard page that I need and chart that I need. If the data is stored as a graph or bar chart, we can get experiment run result chart graph data. So you need to know what kind of data do you want to process. Is it table or, for example, line chart? And after that, I put all the results to the collection that I need. And here we see that everything finished. Let me for now just minimize Excel files. And after everything is processed, I just put all the data to required collections. And that's it. So what we see in anyLogistix, here we have our baseline scenario. We have network optimization experiment with 5 results. Each of these results was processed to these CSV files. But the main thing that we need is that our Power BI is updated from these files and give us the output information. Here it is. And we can see that in the first table, we see the data from the overall stats table split by each of the demand forecasts that we have. In another table, we have the best choices for each of the demand forecasts. And the last table shows us how many times one or another distribution center was selected to be in the best option. And here we can see that 3 distribution centers in Berlin, Sydney, and Vancouver are contained in all the optimizing results. But, for example, we have a choice here between Chicago and Toronto, and London and Madrid. So in Europe, we see that we have Berlin for sure, and in addition to Berlin, we should select Madrid. It was chosen 4 times, or London. In case of the North America, we have a choice between Chicago and Toronto, 3 against 2. And here we can get this information, make some changes in the structure, maybe make some changes in the demand, and run the script again, updating before the files. And we will see the next result, which can be analyzed and give us some information for the further processing. And now let's return back to our presentation, because we have finished with this practice. So we are done with the goals of the case 2. And let's summarize what we have done in the both exercises. First of all, we found out how to import scenario into anyLogistix, or update the data of an existing scenario. We did some practice with running experiments, defining experiment parameters, and after that, we got the dashboard information. We got the certain pages on the dashboard or certain charts on these pages, processed information from these charts, or exported the whole dashboard page to Excel. And also we saw an example how to make a Power BI dashboard work using temporary CSV files where we export data by code. And that's not everything that is covered by the API functionality. In addition, so this is the basics that are required for any logic that you want to implement and automate using API. But I want to highlight some features that we also have in API, and you can use them while you're creating your own processes. The first is that you can execute processes like importing or experiment execution in synchronous and asynchronous ways. What does this mean? If you run as we did in synchronous way, let me even show you it in the IDE. So here, for example, we imported scenario. We did it in synchronous way. That means that when everything will be executed the row by row, we won't get to this row until this function won't be finished. And when we finish importing and return back here information that everything was successful with some additional information stored as API scenario data, only after that we will go further. But if we, for some reason, need to run it in the background and immediately go to the next and next lines, we can use it in synchronous way. For example, if you need to import several scenarios at a time, you can do it. And after that, you will be able to check the status of this importing process. But you will need to write it on your own. So the cycle where you check the status, if everything is finished or not, and probably after that, you will continue the next block of code and so on. Also, we saw an example of how to import from Excel file, but also you can import data from the external database like anyLogistix has from the interface. We changed only the stop date of the simulation, but you can update any parameter of the experiment settings, including variation parameters. So you can do it, you can create them using code and then update experiment settings after you created all variables that you need. And one more thing is that you can get the dashboard data not only in the Excel format like we had today, but also in JSON format if you need, for example, it to upload to somewhere where it can be required, maybe some BI software, or maybe you have some web client which can require JSON format, and so on. In addition, I want to show you that, sorry, any information that you may need, you can find in our documentation. So if you go to the help page and open anyLogistix help section here, we have anyLogistix API submenu here, and for Java or Python, you can see the instructions how to start, and also how to which of functions do you have here. And for all of them, there is an example of code how to use it. So feel free to check the documentation if you need one or another function. And also here we have information about where and how to download the API libraries. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. Hope you enjoyed our webinar and it was useful for you. Practice with your automation using anyLogistix. If you have any questions, please contact us at support@anyLogistix.com and feel free to send any questions that you have. Also, you can use the feature request option here in the software. So in the help menu, both of them, get support or feature request. Feature requests you can use if you have some ideas or thoughts what can be improved, what can be added, maybe how to extend our API and so on. So any thoughts, you are welcome. And thank you one more time again.